everyone. It is Monday, October 21st, 2019, and you are tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report YouTube channel. This is the YouTube channel dedicated to bringing you all-around discussions on pro wrestling news, opinions, show recaps, and wrestling events. If you are checking out the show for the first time, welcome aboard. If you are checking out the show again, and you have not done so already, make sure you subscribe so that you can keep updated on all future FSWR content. Uploads on this channel occur every Monday and Friday. Monday shows are dedicated to news topics and weekend events, and Friday is the review series edition, where we talk about NWA Power, AEW Dynamite, and NXT TV. And for those of you that turn into the initial review series edition, you would know that MLW Fusion was a part of that deal, and going forward, it will not be a part of that deal. I have made the executive decision to swap out MLW for NWA. A, because I think it's an overall better product, and B, because MLW really just wasn't doing anything for me to begin with. So, I might as well swap it out with a product that actually does interest me. Got a handful of topics to go over today, and I don't want to beat around the bush for too long. As far as any preliminary or last-minute news goes, I guess I should quickly mention this. Impact Wrestling's Bound for Glory event took place last night at the Odeum Expo Center in Villa Park, Illinois. And as of this current recording, I have not seen or read anything about that show. I did not have time to watch the show last night, mostly because I spent Sunday night doing prep for this show. Still debating on as to whether or not I want to watch the show in its entirety, or maybe just focus on some of the highlights of the show and talk about them on the review series edition this Friday. Not really sure what I'm going to do yet. Like I said, I haven't heard or seen anything about the show, whether it was good, whether it was bad, if there's anything worth watching. So, like I said, I just haven't had time to watch it yet. If I do have time in the next couple days, I might skim through the results or just check out any of the notable material from the show. If I do not end up covering it by Friday, you could probably venture a guess that I did not watch it. Not out of general disinterest or anything, although I really have had no interest in TNA or Impact Wrestling since early to mid 2017. But more so because there's just so much wrestling going on right now, and it's hard to keep up to date with all of it, even though I do not watch Raw or SmackDown. It's still a lot of content to keep up with. And in addition to the fact that the Bound for Glory show is probably one of those 3-hour pay-per-views, I'd have to set aside a little bit of time to watch that show. I'll keep you posted. Hopefully there's at least something worth mentioning from the show. I know BFG is typically Impact's big event they produce every year, and with them getting ready to premiere on Access TV, they're probably pulling out all the stops to draw in as much intrigue for that show as possible. So there were two primary names at the center of the wrestling news this week, and one of those names was the now former Executive Director of Friday Night SmackDown, Eric Bischoff. The news broke earlier in the week that Eric Bischoff had been fired from his position due to particular circumstances, and as the dust has settled a little on this topic, reports had come out in the previous several days updating us as to these particular circumstances behind the firing/release. And aside from the fact that we now know the position has been given to former WWE Senior Vice President Bruce Pritchard, Paul Davis's report at the Wrestling News covers a decent amount of ground on the follow-up to this topic, including Dave Meltzer's report on the Wrestling Observer regarding the specifics of the firing. Meltzer noted that Bischoff was not familiar with the current talent in WWE or the business changes that had been made. Bischoff was expected to be the next casualty after Ryan Ward burned out as the head of SmackDown and Ed Kortsky was moved over to Raw. Eric had absolutely no vision, and once we were headed into Fox, everything was falling through the cracks, a WWE official told Meltzer. He messed up multiple times with Fox, Eric also had no stamina for the rigors of the job. Then he goes on to talk about the reports of difficulty reaching Bischoff after creative meetings and other matters. So now that we're sort of post-shock of hearing about the firing, and we've had time to analyze the details regarding the matter, we should probably ask ourselves, are we really surprised by this? And to tell you the truth, when I first read about this earlier in the week, I was not surprised at all to hear that Bischoff was fired from his position. Moreover, I always thought Vince hiring Bischoff as the Executive Director of SmackDown was a questionable decision, and I pretty much thought the writing was on the wall from the jump. I mean, think about who we're talking about here. We're talking about a guy who hasn't been relevant in the wrestling business since the mid to late 90s, has not demonstrated a clear, fresh mind for the business in over 20 years, and any of you that still hold the notion that Bischoff's stint with Hogan in TNA was any good are completely delusional. And more than anything else, he's also a holdover from a previous era of wrestling and is simultaneously pushing 70 years of age. And when you tie this in with the fact that Bischoff has been working under direct supervision from Vince McMahon since he undertook this position, is it any wonder that Bischoff hasn't been any successful in this role? Now, as much as I never advocated for Bischoff coming back to WWE at all, based on what I'm reading from this anonymous WWE official that reported to Dave about Eric's work ethic, I'm going to defend Eric for a minute here. Because when I read something like, he messed up multiple times with Fox, without providing any concrete detail as to what Bischoff did or didn't specifically do, and considering that we're still operating under the impression that everything WWE does has to be run through and okayed by Vince McMahon, one word immediately springs to mind when I read something like this. Scapegoat. And I think we should call it exactly as it is. WWE needs a justification as to why SmackDown ratings have been plummeting at an astronomical rate over the last 3 weeks. They needed an outing and a scapegoat to blame for the horrible shows that they've been running on Fox, and Eric was that guy. And even if Eric had little or nothing to do with the continual decline in viewership for that show, even if Eric was not contributing to that show in any major capacity, because of Vince, Eric was still always going to be the fall guy. And I even look at an example like the summer program with Roman Reigns and Eric Rowan as a prime example of something that has Vince McMahon fingerprints all over it. A storyline that had so many illogical twists and turns, plot holes that you could drive an 18-wheeler semi through, random character flops and talent involvement that just sort of fizzled out. How much creative involvement do you think that Bischoff really had in that catastrophe of a storyline? And see, this is always going to be a problem with Eric taking a position to oversee any WWE program, be it Raw or SmackDown. As long as Vince is still there, as long as Vince continues to let his senile and whacked out mind run the day-to-day operations of WWE television, it never mattered who took that position. They were always set up to fail from the beginning. So am I shocked that Bischoff is gone from WWE after only holding this position for, 4 months? No, absolutely not. And, will the show be run any better with Bruce Pritchard in that position instead of Bischoff? Probably not. I mean, it all boils down to what Vince wants. And that's always going to be the unfortunate truth and reality of WWE programming until he either dies or steps down from that position. I know we're all crossing our fingers that Vince's dedication to the XFL in a few months will be the saving grace for WWE fans. I wouldn't hold your breath. So moving along here. Originally, I was not planning on reporting anything regarding NXT, AEW, or WWE ratings, simply because, as I've been noting for a while now, I don't think we are far enough into this Wednesday night battle to really justify the significance of these ratings. And I still maintain that notion. And we're not really going to know how these ratings reflect both products until we get well into 2020. That all said, when I saw the numbers come in, and I saw the significant drop in overall viewership across the board, that being from NXT, AEW, and SmackDown, it got me thinking a little bit as to what these first 3 weeks of the Wednesday Night Wars have really indicated to us as wrestling fans. Because as much as people like to sit there and fantasize about the idea of a second boom period in wrestling, if anything, these ratings have proven that if there is an upcoming boom period in wrestling, I am either too stupid to see it, or I've got blinders the size of Cassius Ohno. And this comes from Sandra Dedani's report at The Mix. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but it's a report from The Mix. And the whole article regards Week 3 ratings for both NXT and AEW. This week's episode of Dynamite on TNT managed to capture 1.014 million viewers. However, Showbuzz Daily reports that NXT only pulled in 712,000 viewers on USA Network. Dynamite on TNT is doing especially well among viewers in the age demographic between 18 and 49. In fact, it beats NXT by a whopping 120% for that age range. The news is not all good for the new promotion, though, as their viewership has dropped from the last week by 0.4%. Even though All Elite Wrestling dropped by 0.4%, NXT did a lot worse. Since last week's episode, NXT has dropped by a whole 10%. Despite the fact that NXT is a developmental brand, there is a worrying trend that has been occurring since September. On September 18th, the brand got a 1.179 million viewership. A little over a month later, the brand has gone down to 712,000 viewers. Sean Rutter's article at Cage Side Seat reports, AEW was down a little more than 100,000 from their combined first-run totals on October 9th. Rating with the 18 to 49-year-old demo was also slightly down to a 0.44 share. The outlook was less rosy for NXT, a continuing theme. The black and gold brand was down about 10% in both metrics and did not have a split audience last week to mitigate the viewership decline. NXT fell to a 0.20 share among 18 to 49-year-olds, 30th best of the night. And with the upcoming World Series Game 2 coming up this Wednesday at 8 o'clock, you know that both shows are going to take an even greater hit than they are right now. So that's where we stand right now with this ongoing Wednesday battle between NXT and AEW for viewership. And based on what we've seen from both programs over the last few weeks, there does not seem to be any show or signs of drastic improvement anytime soon. And then there's SmackDown, which is a whole other can of worms to open up. This comes from Tom Maglio's report at The Wrap regarding SmackDown's Week 3 ratings. The WWE Pro Wrestling Series attached the smallest TV audience, 2.441 million total viewers, of any other show on the Big Four broadcast networks, which refers to CBS, NBC, Fox, and ABC. In terms of total viewers, SmackDown declined 16% from the prior Friday. Fox's Friday Night SmackDown premiered on October 4th to a 1.4 demo rating and 3.888 million total viewers. Simple math tells us that by week 3, the series has already halved its debuting big live demo rating. It was not unexpected that SmackDown would slip from week 1 to week 2, and then again from week 2 to week 3. But the steepness of the trajectory is not what WWE would like to see. That said, and despite a 30% week-to-week drops in the all-important adults 18 to 49 demographic, SmackDown was the highest-rated series of the night, which means Fox was still number one network on Friday, but it was so close this time, Fox's and SmackDown's 0.7 rating in the key demo just squeaked by CBS's 0.6 according to Nielsen's live and same-day ratings. And I know there are a lot of contributing factors that you could apply to why we're seeing this steady decline in all these wrestling programs across the board. And I understand that there's always going to be the incentive to try and defend one product over the other to try and validate which one is worth the long-term investment. But the fact is that these ratings are indicative of the reality of pro wrestling in 2019. These products are not engaging the audience. There has been no incentive to watch on a week-to-week basis because, for the most part, there's no progression or growth with characters or storylines, which is the heart and soul of what makes compelling television. And this has been a problem in both WWE and AEW. And I said this in my review series edition this past week. I have watched 3 weeks of NXT and AEW programming, and the common theme between both shows is that there is a heavy emphasis on wrestling and not so much emphasis on promo activity and or character progression. And I'm sorry to say it, but you can put guys like Darby Allin or Sammy Guevara or Adam Page in matches every week on TV, or on the other side, you can put guys like Damian Priest or Jordan Myles or Cameron Grimes in matches every week on TV. If fans don't know who they are, what their goals are, or why we should care about them, well, simply put, we won't care. Hence, we won't watch. I mean, just to give you an example of the kinds of things I'm referring to me, the best thing on that Dynamite show last week was the Cody video package. And why? Because it told me Cody's backstory, it told me about the implication of his journey to get to where he is now, and it told me why I should care and why I should invest in him beating Jericho for the world title at the upcoming pay-per-view. In just one 2-minute video, I learned more about Cody's path to the world title picture than I did about any other character's story development on that show, including the guy that main evented that show for the world title in Darby Allin. And again, I'm not going to exclude NXT because I see these same kinds of problems on a week-to-week basis from that show, where they just throw guys together in matches and expect them to get over with moves instead of backstories. I'm yet to figure out why I should care about talents like Cameron Grimes or Jordan Myles or Damian Priest. What are their stories? Where did they come from? What was their journey like to get to WWE? What are their goals in WWE? Why should I care about them? And I'm yet to get answers to any of this. And as much as I love talents like Rhea Ripley and Walter and any of the crossover talent from the UK brand, there's still a lingering question that has not been answered. What are they doing on regular NXT TV? Aside from the obvious of being written on the show by creative. But seriously, why did Rhea Ripley show up randomly to confront Shayna Baszler? Apparently because Shayna hasn't beaten her yet? Okay, but what's your incentive to go after the women's title? What's Walter's incentive to defend the UK title on regular NXT TV? Here's another $1 million question. Why did Finn Balor come back to NXT? Aside from the really vague description he gave in that video package where he needed to retrace his past in order to find himself, or whatever the hell that even means, I don't really know why Balor is back working NXT. And quite frankly, judging from the lack of explanations we've been getting to any of these questions, it's obvious that there was not much forethought put into these stories before they did them. I mean, I dig shock factor television as much as the next guy, but you can't just rely on Crash TV programming to entice people to watch your shows anymore. It's a different era, it's a different business, and the fans are a lot more critical and analytical of the product than they were 20 plus years ago. In a previous era, you could get away with having Stone Cold Steve Austin show up with a beer truck and hose down the corporation. And 20 plus years after the fact, people still look at that as one of the greatest moments of the Attitude Era. You try that same concept in 2019, people are going to sit there and wonder, why is this bald-headed lunatic hijacking a beer truck and spraying down the boss of the company without receiving any kind of ramification for it? These are questions that smart wrestling fans come up with because we've been so exposed to the business over time that these are the kinds of things that we just think of. And with NXT and AEW having a lot of younger and greener talent across the board, more so in AEW than NXT, believe it or not, it is absolutely essential that they provide storyline context for everything they do, especially for the newer faces. So these are some of the problems that NXT and AEW are facing at the moment. And I also think it's the reflection of why their ratings are declining. And from what I'm reading about with main roster WWE right now, it seems like they're venturing back into the territory that I warned everyone would be a problem from the jump. Not enough focus on getting your current guys over, and too much focus on using celebrities and legends to pop short-term ratings. And judging from how this reflects the TV programming both on Raw and SmackDown, it doesn't seem to be working, does it? I mean, look at the SmackDown premiere on Fox from just 2 weeks ago. After that show was over, what were the two major talking points worth mentioning? Cain Velasquez, and Tyson Fury, a former UFC fighter and a professional boxer. All the while, what did WWE do to try and get over their current talent pool? Well, they shoved a bunch of guys into random multi-man matches that didn't get over. They had their recent King of the Ring winner get punked out by a guy that hasn't wrestled a match since 2013. Well, technically 2016 if you count Rock beating Eric Rowan in a short impromptu squash match at Mania, which I don't. Oh, and, there's also them beating Kofi Kingston in the main event for the WWE title in 7 seconds after 6 months of character development. And this isn't even counting all the garbage with that horrendously booked draft they did. And what was the result after 3 weeks? 30% drop in 18 to 49 male demo, 50% drop in overall viewership, and no signs of improvement anytime soon. And I said this in my review series recap, but I'll state it again because I think it's important. Particularly with these AEW and NXT shows, I'm seeing a lot of emphasis on the wrestling aspect of things and less emphasis on character development and backstory. I need to know more about a lot of the newer talent that's being presented on both shows. And aside from a few vignettes on NXT and a couple video packages on AEW hyping up the key stars, there still seems to be this mentality going around that people already know who these guys and gals are, hence we don't need to have deep, in-depth promos explaining who they are. Maybe for the hardcores that works, but I'm telling you, if you want to grow your audience and you want to draw in new viewers to fill your show, throwing guys out to flip-flop around the ring for 15 minutes is only going to get you so far. And after 3 weeks of this Wednesday Night Wars experiment, I'm starting to worry that neither NXT nor AEW have their priorities straight as to the concept of how to create compelling television. Thus, we are seeing a lot of viewership dropping as opposed to viewership gaining. Yes, I know it's still too early in the war to determine the substance of what this means, but if we're 6 months down the road from now and we're still talking about how the audiences are dwindling for both of these programs, then I'll look back at this conversation we're having right now and I will tell you straight up, see everything I just mentioned about week 3 of the NXT and AEW ratings. So earlier I talked about Eric Bischoff being at the focal point of the Pro Wrestling Bulletin this week. And the second name on that list, the name that's caused the most controversy over the entire week, shockingly enough, Marko Stunt. And, I talked about Marko Stunt in the review series edition. I said my piece about what I thought of him as a wrestler and a performer. I tried to be as fair and unbiased in my explanation as to why I'm not a fan of his. And after taking a few days to read over what other people thought of him, and maybe if I was being too harsh in my analysis, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I was being too fair in my analysis. Because, good God, there are a lot of people that absolutely hated that Marko Stunt match from Wednesday night. And you want to know the damnedest thing about that match, too? Apparently, statistically, and this is according to Dave Meltzer's report on the Observer Radio from Sunday night, the Marko Stunt match actually did not do all that bad in the ratings. In fact, there was actually a slight gain in viewership towards the end of the match. And while there was a bit of a turnoff at the beginning of the segment, those numbers did not drop as drastically as I think a lot of people were foreseeing it would. So, it is kind of an odd bubble we're in right now, where for as much as people have been complaining about the Marko Stunt match and saying that it's an embarrassment to the wrestling business and it's a disgrace, Jim Cornette, for right now, it doesn't look like Marko Stunt's debut on TV has signaled any kind of short-term detriment to AEW's overall viewership. And then even Chris Jericho is on Twitter basically laughing at how upset everyone's gotten over the whole deal. And in this tweet, he basically defends the idea that it's 2019, the business has evolved to a point where pretty much anyone can get over if the crowd gets behind them, and he'd rather watch small guys that can move as opposed to, near 7-foot muscle heads that can't move. And granted, you can mock the sheer absurdity of Jericho basically breaking kayfabe to come to the defense of Marko Stunt of all people. And yeah, it's dumb. But he does make some valid points here, especially when he gives perspective of what it was like when he was first introduced to guys like Rey Mysterio back in '93. Now, that all being said, I do want to take the time to elaborate more on the matter because, I know it's coming across right now that I'm trying to come up with all these excuses to defend what AEW did on Wednesday night, and I did spend a good deal of time in that recap giving my rationale as to why I do not buy Marko Stunt as a legitimate competitor. And the bottom line is that I have to view this from the perspective of AEW's primary business model. If you are going to operate under the idea of a sports-driven product, and that everything you do is geared towards a more serious approach to the sports aspect of things, as opposed to the corporate entertainment world, that's fine. But you can't sit there then and trot out a scrawny teenager in front of a national cable television audience, pin him up against male wrestlers twice his size, and have to cover up for it by the fact that he has to do overly choreographed spots that are designed more for flashy entertainment purposes just to make anything look believable. You've either got to be serious sports product or goofy entertainment TV. You can't have it both ways. And at no point during that Marko Stunt match on Wednesday did I believe that he could conceivably hang under any circumstances with the Lucha Brothers. And it's not just a reflection of Marko's height, although that is a contributing factor, and I think it's something that people are getting hung up on the most. It's also tied in with the fact that he has absolutely no body definition or muscle tone. And this is why I don't like reading about all the Rey Mysterio comparisons. Yes, Rey Mysterio has always been a short guy, but Rey also had body definition and muscle tone, and he was still about 50 to 60 pounds heavier than Marko is. And when I watch Marko compete in the ring with guys that are not just taller than him, but physically built twice as better as him, it diminishes Marko's credibility that much more. The human body needs a certain amount of padding on his or her body to safely and effectively take bumps in the ring. And every time I see Marko get thrown around or slammed down on the mat, I just think, this kid does not have enough of a physical build to securely take ring bumps. He's going to get hurt or he's going to get killed. One of the two. And this should be a concern for a lot of people too. Because I'll tell you this right now. You want to know who else is 23 years old, gauntly thin with no body definition, and is about 110 pounds soaking wet? Me. And do you see me getting in a professional wrestling ring with guys twice my size, trying to have legitimate pro wrestling matches? No. And why? Because it's completely preposterous and silly to even think about. And I'll even put myself over to a slighter extent, which is completely unlike me in every way imaginable, but I've at least got a few inches on Marko Stunt, because I'm at least 5'5", 5'6". And again, I keep going back to this term, but I'll reiterate again for the sake of making my point. Believability. You've got to make everything you present look believable to the public, otherwise it's going to look completely fake and choreographed. It's the same deal I've been trying to get over with the Nyla Rose situation. And again, I want to be careful because I know this is a touchy subject, but the reality is, I still don't buy the idea of Nyla Rose having fair, believable matches with other female workers in AEW. And it has nothing to do with her psychological feeling of what her gender is, but it has everything to do with the reality that no matter what kind of hormone treatment therapy or supplemental intake you do, the fact is that you cannot scientifically alter your chromosomal makeup. And again, I go back to this point. If you want to be seen as more of a sports-driven product, you have to understand the basics of the competitive nature of the field. And I can promise you that in the professional sports world, you will never, ever see a major women's basketball team go up against a major men's basketball team. You will never see a major women's soccer team go up against a major men's soccer team. And, on the subject of combat sports, since that's what professional wrestling is to an extent, you will never, ever, 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 in a million light years, see a female MMA fighter or UFC athlete square off against a male MMA or UFC athlete. It's the same reason why I don't like intergender wrestling matches, particularly ones where the male athlete clearly has the established advantage over the female athlete. I'm all for inclusivity and diversity in this world. I see absolutely no problem with having an established work environment of all sexes, races, and personalities. If you can have a coexisting group of coworkers with all unique types of background traits, that's great. But I've just noticed this weird thing with my generation in the corporate world. And I have no idea when this started, but I see it more and more as I watch and I read about what these higher authorities look for in their employees. And I see this all the time when I go through training at my workstation. It's this idea of hiring solely on the basis of diversity as opposed to competency. And I just don't understand how we've reached this point in culture today where we are so worried about hurting people's feelings that we're completely discounting the real important heart of the matter. Regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, or race, is the person suitable for the position? Does he, she, it, whichever of the 2,400 self-proclaimed pronouns that only exist in whore hells like New York and California, is this person qualified for the position? And I think about what AEW is doing with talents like Nyla Rose. I think about what they're doing with talents like Sonny Kiss. I think about what they're doing with talents like Marko Stunt. And I just can't help but garner the thought that it looks as if these talents were hired simply due to their diverse qualities as opposed to their true level of in-ring talent. And when I look particularly at Marko Stunt in his current incarnation, I just do not see him having any level of marketability in the future. He's never going to draw you money for pay-per-view buys. He's not going to drastically increase your TV ratings on a week-to-week basis. He might not saddle the ratings like I think a lot of people are anticipating. Yeah, he might draw in some additional eyeballs in the short term just for the general intrigue of what's this 12-year-old teenager doing getting beaten up by men twice his size. But it's not going to be sustainable. I think it's pretty safe to say that unless Marko adopts the lessons from Big Papa Pump and jacking up your physique over a period of time, Marko is never going to be seen as any type of main event or top-tier title contender. So at the end of the day, it really does beg the question, what purpose does he really serve? And I think that's really my long-winded point that I'm trying to make here. Aside from not really seeing any kind of appeal in the Marko Stunt character, I really just don't see how he's going to contribute to AEW's overall bottom line. Yeah, it'd be one thing if AEW had any kind of legitimate junior heavyweight or minis division, but that doesn't seem to be something that they're going after with their audience. And your only other alternative of making Marko's matches look realistic in AEW is having him go up against the female talent. And even then, I'd take the bets that most of the women there could believably eat Marko for lunch. So I'm really having a hard time figuring out what AEW hopes to gain out of Marko. I didn't mind the mascot stuff he was doing for Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus, but again, most of that's contributed to the fact that I didn't have to watch him wrestle a lot of the time. Yeah, maybe you can get a little more mileage out of him if you have him work matches where he gets in no offense and he ends up being the babyface in peril for Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy, but it's always going to be a steep grade there. And even by those standards, how many times can you present the Marko Stunt gets the crap beaten out of him in a match before people start to get bored with it? Overall, I just think that AEW is seeing more in Marko than what he can plausibly offer to their company in the long term. With how new and how young AEW's product is to the public right now, I just keep wondering if they really think that the best course of action is to try and get Marko Stunt over, as opposed to try and get over talent that will really offer a net benefit to AEW in the long term. So that's where I stand with Marko Stunt right now. It's probably an unpopular opinion. Well, judging how people have been reacting on social media, I guess it's not an unpopular opinion. But I just want to throw my perspective at it. Maybe he can offer something to them. I don't think he's completely futile in AEW. They could probably do stuff with him in a non-wrestling capacity, but that's always going to be the problem if they try to push him as a legitimate competitor. If he was just a mascot or a mouthpiece for Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy, that'd be one thing. make him like the Jimmy Hart of the group or something like that. That would make sense. But when you put him in the ring with guys twice his size and you try to have him be competitive with them, you're just opening up a whole can of worms that you just really don't want to go down. Anyway, with that said, everyone, that'll wrap up the content for this edition of the 5-Star Wrestling Report. If you enjoyed the content I talked about today, or you have any opinion about the topics I discussed, go ahead and share your feedback down below. Also, if you would like to keep updated on all future FSWR content each week, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click that bell icon to receive notifications. In addition, if you could give this video a rating, that would be great as well. Take care, everyone, and I will see you on Friday for the review series show.